Good day. Some years ago, I remember reading an article an interview by Russian President Vladimir Putin, in which he actually discussed the work of intelligence agencies. Putin, of course, was himself, as we all know, once upon a time, an intelligence officer working for the first directorate of the KGB. That's the part of the KGB which was assigned to carrying out, conducting foreign intelligence. And he was based in East Germany as part of his duties, of which, by the way, we still know remarkably little. Putin was also, for a time in the late 1990s, the director of Russia's counterintelligence agency, the FSB, which, by the way, is the residual organization which carries out most of the internal functions that the old Soviet KGB used to carry out. So Putin is somebody who is familiar with the world of intelligence, though, as I said, exactly what he did whilst he was an intelligence officer for the KGB in East Germany, we really don't know very much about. However, the thing that he said in this interview, which did raise my eyebrows a little, is that whilst intelligence agencies do an essential and necessary job, there is one thing they absolutely must not do, which is spy on the country which is allied to the country which they work for. Now, he didn't mention which country he had in mind as the ally of Russia, in which supposedly Russian intelligence does not maintain an intelligence gathering operation, but it was not difficult to work out that it was China. So if you take Putin's words literally, what he means is that the Russians do not conduct intelligence in China, targeted at the Chinese authorities, and presumably that the Chinese also do not conduct intelligence gathering about Russia within Russia. Supposedly, we are asked to believe the Chinese and the Russians cooperate closely on intelligence gathering, share information, but don't spy on each other. Well, like many things that are said in this world, one should take all of that with a great pinch of salt. In fact, I would say more like a mountain of salt. Personally, I would be extremely surprised indeed if the Russians did not keep some sort of tabs on what the Chinese were doing. They have, after all, an extensive diplomatic presence in China. They have a large embassy in Beijing, and they have a very large consulate in Shanghai, which I also saw. And, of course, these are two important nodes, and I am sure that they gather information about China there, and they pass that on to the authorities in Moscow. As for what the Chinese do, I'd be absolutely staggered. In fact, I don't believe for one microsecond that they don't do something at least the same scale, probably on a much bigger scale, in Russia. I am sure that there are Chinese intelligence analysts keeping careful watch on what China does, monitoring Russian intelligence, or what Russia does, monitoring Russian domestic politics, assessing who is up and down in the Kremlin, and what the state of Russia's economy and society and of its opposition is. You only have to go to the Chinese media to see how concerned the Chinese are about developments in Russia, how much they want to know about what is going on within this key ally that they now believe they have won over. So we should take Putin's words, as I said, with a mountain of salt. But at least the Russians and the Chinese adopt the fiction, if you like, that they don't spy on each other. And I suspect it's a little more than just a fiction. I suspect that covert activity, wiretapping, eavesdropping, attempts to bribe the officials of the other country in order to get classified information. That sort of thing, I suspect, goes on practically a very little, if it happens at all. And I'm going to make a further guess that on some issues where intelligence agencies are always out to get information about the other side, about another country, which is on military technology developments, well, I suspect that the Russians and the Chinese cooperate extensively with each other, and there's very little that either power does that the other is not well informed about. Anyway, that's Russia and China. The Western alliance, it turns out, is profoundly different. And I say that because, of course, we've now had these two major developments on the intelligence gathering front in Europe. The first is a decision of the European Court of Human Rights, which has said that the bulk surveillance carried out by the British intelligence agency, GCHQ, which is, by the way, the British electronic surveillance agency that parallels the NSA in the United States, that the GCHQ's bulk surveillance operation is illegal and contradicts human rights, specifically the rights to privacy, which are protected under Article 8 of the European Convention on Human Rights. And the other big revelation is that the United States has been undertaking surveillance of important European leaders and governments, including those of France and Germany, using the help of Danish intelligence in order to do it. Now, what is really interesting about all of this is, firstly, that we actually have known about this for a very long time. When Edward Snowden became a whistleblower and started revealing the extent of the NSA's bulk surveillance, both in Europe and in a roundabout way in the United States. Also, he disclosed, or as part of those disclosures, it came out that the NSA was keeping track on what European leaders do and was even hacking and listening in to Angela Merkel's conversations on her mobile phone network. And it was also revealed as part of Snowden's revelations that GCHQ plays an absolutely central role in assisting the NSA to carry out all of these bulk surveillance activities in Europe, and that it is in fact a major player in these activities in cooperation and collaboration with the NSA. So we've known about this for a very long time, since 2013 to be precise, when Edward Snowden gave us this information. And whilst the revelation that the Danes have also been involved in this activity is something of a surprise, I have to say again that it is a surprise that will shock no one. If I can discuss in a moment the reason why Denmark, of all countries, might have been involved in all of those activities, can I first of all say that what these revelations in fact show is that the Western Alliance has always operated at two levels. Firstly, there is the United States and its core allies. Those core allies are first and foremost the Anglophone states that make up the Five Eyes: the United States, Canada, Britain, Australia, and New Zealand. That is the core alliance around which US power is constructed. But also, it turns out that there are some countries that are perhaps closer to the Five Eyes than other countries. And Denmark is, as it turns out, one. And I'm going to make a pretty shrewd guess that the Netherlands is another. Now, why Denmark and the Netherlands? Well, firstly, both countries are advanced countries with abilities to operate fairly sophisticated intelligence operations, but also it's important to stress that both countries have long and very close historic ties to Britain, and of course Britain is a key member of the Five Eyes. Note that both the Netherlands and Denmark are monarchies in the same way that Britain is. They were allies of Britain in the Second World War, and in both cases the British royal family has had histories of intermarriage with the Danish royal family very recently, and with the Dutch royal family going all the way back to the 18th century, the 17th and 18th centuries, when William of Orange, the stadtholder of the Netherlands, was briefly, or at least for a time, King of England and Scotland. So we have a long history of close interaction between the Dutch and the Danes and the British. And one of the things that draws these two countries together, or these countries together with Britain, is another factor, which is a shared suspicion of the giant next door. The giant, in this case, by the way, being Germany. Germany fought a bitter war against Denmark way back in the 1860s, which resulted in Denmark losing a large part of what is now the German land of Schleswig-Holstein. And of course, Denmark was also occupied by Germany during World War II. The Netherlands has also had a prickly relationship with Germany. It's very wary of becoming dominated by Germany, even though in some ways, culturally, it is fairly close, though the extent of that closeness can be overstated. And the Dutch also had a harrowing experience, an especially harrowing experience of occupation by Germany, by Nazi Germany, during the Second World War. I'm going to make a venture guess that there is a third country with which the United States in Europe maintains fairly close intelligence cooperation, and that is Sweden. Now, Sweden is an interesting case because Sweden technically is not a member of NATO. Sweden has a long history of neutrality, which the Swedes like to prize and talk a lot about, but which, in my opinion, has always existed very much on the surface. The Swedes are also wary of the giant next door, and in their case, the giant is not Germany, but Russia. During the Second World War, for example, it's fairly well known that the Swedish Navy was fairly active in the Baltic Sea, not exactly in alliance with Germany and not exactly working with the German fleet, but certainly keeping tabs on the Soviet Navy at that time in the Baltic and in order to keep the Russians to some extent at bay. The Swedes also have good reasons for being wary of Russia. Sweden and Russia fought a bitter war, the Northern War, in the early 18th century, when the Swedes were comprehensively defeated by Peter the Great, losing large areas of territory, including that part of Russia upon which Russia's second capital, St. Petersburg, is built. And of course, the Swedes also fought another much shorter war with Russia at the beginning of the 19th century, over the course of which they lost Finland, which as a result became, for a while, a part of the Russian Empire, or at least a Grand Duchy connected to the Russian Empire, though with its own laws. And of course, after the First World War, it became an entirely independent country. So the Swedes also have a complex relationship with the Russians. So these are factors which draw these relatively small northern countries the Netherlands, Denmark, Sweden towards intelligence cooperation with the United States and with Britain, and indeed with the Five Eyes. And it seems that, in fact, the way in which many of the cables and wireless networks have been organized, and I am sure this is intentional, has been that many of them pass through Denmark, and that has enabled Denmark to play a critical role within the European Union in carrying out surveillance, targeted surveillance on behalf of the United States. So we had a situation going on over the last few decades where GCHQ appears to carry out bulk surveillance of the United States' so-called allies in Europe, and where Denmark, for its part, seems to have been doing targeted surveillance also on behalf of the United States. Now, the Danish government recently said that all of this was going on without their knowledge, that they supposedly found out about it in 2020, that the leadership of Denmark's various intelligence agencies were all collectively sacked, and that this has all come as a horrible surprise to the Danish government and to the political parties there. Well, if you believe that, I have a bridge to sell you. What I would say is simply this. I've no doubt that all those people were sacked by the Danish government, as has been said, but I strongly suspect that they've been made scapegoats for something that everybody of importance in Copenhagen has been known about for a very, very long time. But there is perhaps a more important lesson to be drawn from all of this. Firstly, it's absolutely clear that the United States doesn't fully trust its major European allies. It doesn't trust Germany, and it doesn't trust France. I'm going to make a guess that it doesn't fully trust Italy either. It keeps very careful tabs on all three. I know for a fact that the United States has a huge intelligence operation in Italy. I know also that it cooperates with the Italian intelligence agencies to keep track of what is going on in Italy. This dates back to the early years after the Second World War, when Italy had a very strong communist party, and the United States was very anxious to ensure that it never came to power, bringing Italy's position in NATO in jeopardy. Germany and France are different, but they're obviously also major powers with their own potentially strong foreign policies, and in the case of France, a very effective intelligence gathering operation of its own, but one which appears to be, unlike those of Britain and of Denmark, wholly separate and independent of that of the United States. So, the United States wants to keep tabs on what its major European allies do. And as I said, what that demonstrates is ultimately and fundamentally a lack of trust. Obviously, the United States worries to some extent that one day these countries might indeed start to exert themselves in a way that makes them independent of the United States. And I'm going to say something else. I am fairly sure that pretty much everyone in Berlin and Paris knows this, and that the fact that the United States is always there, hovering, looking over their shoulder, is something which undoubtedly to some extent affects the way in which German political leaders, especially at the highest level, have acted up to now. Well, what are the Europeans going to do now that the extent of this surveillance of them and of the United States' mistrust of them has been exposed? Are they going to rebel? Are they going to say to the United States, this is absolutely unacceptable, it's completely outrageous, this must all stop. From now on, we insist that the United States no longer spy on us in the way that it has done. Well, if that is your expectation, then be prepared to be disappointed. Because if one thing has become absolutely clear over the last 10 or so years, and certainly since the Snowden revelations, it is that neither the Germans nor the French are prepared to break with the United States, even on an issue as important as this. Bear in mind that back in 2013, all of these countries, Germany, France included, all of the countries that today make up the European Union, worked together with the United States to force down the aircraft of the Bolivian president, Evo Morales, in order to find out whether Edward Snowden, the person who had let the cat out of the bag in response to these revelations, whether he was in fact hiding in that plane. It turned out that he wasn't, and it was all very embarrassing. And of course, we don't talk about that anymore, but there it is. They were all willing collaborators in that enterprise, and that, more than anything else, shows that to a certain extent, they've now become so accustomed to the fact that they're spied on by the Americans that they are prepared to accept that fact and are not prepared to make such a big play of it as to break with the United States over it. And in fact, this is a good example of what the German philosopher Friedrich Paul Nietzsche might once have referred to as a slave morality on the part of certain European powers. Once upon a time, Germany, France, and the rest were mighty countries. But the events of the Second World War and the reality of American power have overawed them and their political classes to the point where it has become psychologically all but impossible for them to break with the United States and to think that they can actually do what it is in fact fully in their power to do, which is break with the United States and forge independent foreign policies. In the 1960s and 1970s, some German politicians and some French politicians who grew up before the Second World War and had memories of a time when their countries were generally independent were prepared up to a certain degree to take action which was independent and at cross purposes with that of the United States. One thinks of people like Willy Brandt and Helmut Schmidt in Germany and Charles de Gaulle in France. But that generation has gone, and the people who hold power or imagine that they hold power today in Berlin and Paris are of a post-war generation for whom the reality of American dominance is the only thing that they have only ever known, and who cannot conceive of a world without it. So they will make a few statements, as the French and the Germans have in fact done, complaining about what the United States is doing, but very quickly and very soon we will see everything go back to normal. The same, by the way, applies to that European Court of Human Rights judgment about GCHQ. It is remarkable how little about it has been said in Britain. I found one article in The Guardian, which is, by the way, on the opinion page, and virtually the entire remainder of the news media has barely touched on the story, despite its self-evident importance. That is a clear signal to me that the word has gone out, that the GCHQ is going to carry on much as always, and it's just going to shrug its shoulders and ignore this court judgment as it carries on doing, perhaps in a somewhat modified way, exactly what it has been doing previously. And as for Denmark, the Netherlands, Sweden, and the rest, the geopolitical imperatives, which at least in their own mind have led them to take these steps, will continue exactly as before. Sweden will continue to be wary of Russia. Denmark and the Netherlands will continue to be wary of Germany. And that will draw them to the United States and to their old ally and protector, Britain. And I suspect that before very long, all the same activities that used to take place will continue exactly as always. That the fact that European leaders know precisely what is going on, the fact that they are being watched and monitored and spied on and surveyed, is shown by the way in which Charles Michel, the President of the European Council, took that step, which I discussed in a video of a few days ago, which was to order that all participants in a European Council meeting, all participants being heads of government and heads of state of the various countries that make up the European Union, that they all leave their mobile phones and other electronic devices out of the room where the European Council meeting was due to take place. I said at the time that this was undoubtedly intended to conceal the fact that a huge row about Russia was going to take place at that meeting, and all the evidence is that that row did duly take place. But Michel did say that it was to prevent somebody eavesdropping, and it's now fairly obvious that that somebody was Britain and the United States. So despite all of this, despite the fact that the Europeans know all about it, for the time being at least, they will continue to do it. They will continue to take steps to block Huawei from establishing its 5G networks in Europe so that the Chinese can't spy on them, even as they know that their American ally is spying on them. They will continue to act loyally towards the United States, even as they sense and even as they deep down know that the United States doesn't really trust them. Deep down, in the core of their own being, as people who find themselves in this kind of relationship, with them it's always the case, the French and the Germans will despise themselves for accepting this kind of mistreatment. But going back to what Nietzsche said about a slave morality, that's going to make them even more subservient to their master, the United States, than they might otherwise have been. People who possess self-respect and self-confidence don't accept this sort of thing. And the Germans and the French, if they had that degree of self-respect and self-confidence vis-a-vis the Americans, would not have put up with it long ago. So there we are. I started with Vladimir Putin and some of the things he said about spies, about countries not spying on their allies. I'm going to come back to what another Russian leader, former Prime Minister Viktor Chernomydin, once said, which I think sums up the Europeans fairly well. We did our best, we did what we could, but everything turned out as always. And I predict and expect that this is the same that we're going to see this time. Everything will turn out as always. Or, as that great writer, the Prince of Lampedusa, once also said, the more things change, the more they remain the same. In terms of US surveillance and mistrust of its allies, the more revelations there are about the fact that this is going on, the more it will continue and remain the same. One day, perhaps, especially if US power becomes increasingly challenged around the world, one day, maybe, the people of France and Germany will find the courage to stand up to this sort of thing and to tell their politicians that enough is enough. We must start acting like independent countries once more. But I predict that that will come from below, not from the leadership above. And as always happens, it will meet intense resistance before it finally wins. There we go. On those somewhat pessimistic but realistic thoughts, I will finish this program. Thank you for joining me. I look forward to you joining me in future programs on this channel, and I hope that you will also look to join me with my friend Alex Christoforou on our main channel, The Duran, and also don't forget to check out Alex's channel. Don't also forget to check us out on our new platforms, BitChute, Odyssey, SuperU and Locals. SuperU and Locals being especially wonderful platforms as we have found. And please also don't forget, if you can, and to the extent that you can, to support us via PayPal, Patreon and Subscribestar. Lastly, don't forget to go to our shop, get yourself the wonderful things you will find there, our amazing magic mugs, our hats, our hoodies, our sweatshirts, and the rest. And don't forget too to go to our Discord server and check your subscription to this channel and press the like button on this video if you've liked this video as well. Thank you very much for joining me for this program, and I look forward to you joining me in future programs fairly soon, and have a wonderful day until then.